Welcome to the Winnipeg South 2021 federal debate on the environment, hosted by GreenPAC and local partners, including University of Manitoba Indigenous Concerns on the Environment, University of Manitoba Students Union, Ni Ska Tan, Manitoba Research Alliance, and Manitoba Eco Network. We are broadcasting from Treaty 1 territory and the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. The electricity we are using to connect with you today is being generated on the territories of Treaties 1, 3, and 5, and the water we will be using to sustain us also comes from Treaty 3 territory. Our Winnipeg South debate is one of over 100 debates being held in communities across the country and will demonstrate to local politicians that the environment needs to be front and center in this election and is a top issue for voters. Please note that this debate is being recorded. I'm Lynne Fernandez, and I'm a registered voter in South Winnipeg. I recently retired from the Manitoba office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and I'm a research associate with the Manitoba Research Alliance. I will be your moderator tonight. There are 5 candidates running in South Winnipeg. All 5 were invited to participate. The candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada was not available, and the candidate for the People's Party of Canada did not respond. Now, before I welcome the 3 candidates who will be participating, I need to explain the format and the points of order. We have 2 sets of questions, all of which have been shared with the participants. The first set of 3 questions cover pan-Canadian issues. And the first question itself has 3 questions to which each respondent will provide a yes or no. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to all the other questions, and I will switch up the order in which candidates respond. There will be no rebuttals, but should the last 2 respondents choose to use their time to address the comments by the candidate who went before them, that's fine. The second set has 8 questions which have been provided by local environmentalists. Once again, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond, and I will change the order in which the candidates respond, and there will be no rebuttals. At the end of all the questions, each candidate will have 2 minutes to make concluding remarks. We do anticipate having some time at the end for audience Q&A. Please send your brief questions to the Q&A function, and my colleague Matt will forward them to me. We may not have time to take all the questions, but we'll try. Glenn, who is our trusted timekeeper, will flash a 20-second warning, so you will know when you're running out of time in your responses. And then I think you have a 5-second response as well, Glenn. And when your time's up, we'll let you know. And we won't cut you off mid-sentence or anything, but do remember, if you go on and on, we do have the power of mute.
Lynn,
yes.
So it's 2 minutes per question?
That's right.
Okay, I had read 1 minute on a previous brief, but
I'm
2
sorry,
minutes.
I think we amended it and perhaps you didn't get the amended one. Yes, so
okay.
You'll have 2 minutes for all the questions except for the first one, okay?
I may be briefer than my colleagues, so.
Please stay on topic. I will raise a point of order if a respondent wanders into a new topic that's not related to the question at hand. And I will also raise a point of order should a candidate behave aggressively or disrespectfully, which of course I don't expect, but I have to say that. And candidates, could you please stay on mute until it's your turn to speak? So it's now my pleasure to introduce each of the candidates participating tonight. You will have 1 minute for an introductory statement about yourself, why you're running, and why you are participating in this debate. Welcome, Boettcher from the Green Party of Canada. You have 1 minute, please.
Hello, my name is Boettcher, and I am indeed the Green Party candidate running in Winnipeg South. This is my first foray into politics. I've chosen to run because I'm seeing a lot of what I'm referring to as political tribalism in Parliament these days. It seems as if there's not a lot getting done. I think that the time for debate is now. Once the government receives a mandate, that's time to put debate, a lot of that debate aside, and focus on governing. And I would like to see politics resume a more civil tone. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Welcome, Aiden Kahanovitch for the NDP. You have 1 minute.
Greetings, my name is Aiden Kahanovitch. I am the NDP candidate for Winnipeg South. For myself, the reason that I've gotten into politics and opted to put my name forward for the NDP this year is because I am looking to build stronger communities, and that's done in a multitude of different ways. My background is within the health sector. So I'm a human resources professional and have spent the last decade working in and amongst the health and disability sectors. And so that's one facet of building a healthy community, but the environment and climate is just another piece of that, building healthy, vibrant, strong communities and ensuring that those communities are sustainable in the future. So that's why I'm here today.
Thank you, Aiden. Welcome, Terry Duguid of the Liberal Party of Canada. And Terry, the last minute is yours. Oh, you're on mute.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to join you from Treaty 1 territory, the homeland of the Métis Nation, and wonderful to welcome my colleagues Aiden and Greg to the debate tonight. I'm Terry Duguid, the MP for Winnipeg South. I'm a lifelong advocate for environmental protection. I currently represent the multi-faith, multicultural riding of Winnipeg South, the real microcosm of Canada, home of the University of Manitoba. I am running in this election to protect our healthcare system, to take strong action on climate and fresh water, as well as to foster more equality in this wonderful country of ours.
Thank you, Terry. I'm going to get into the first set of questions now, and these 3 questions deal with pan-Canadian concerns. So the first one here is your preamble on this. COVID has brought to light the links between the climate crisis, the human impact on nature, and the rise of global pandemics. Like SARS, Ebola, and nearly three-quarters of infectious diseases, scientists generally agree that COVID originated in other animal species and spread to humans in large part because of the pressures of on these species brought on by land use changes and unsustainable consumption. These factors are also leading causes of climate change. So this topic has 3 questions that each deal with immediate measures the government can take to address these interlinked crises to protect the health of Canadians as we hopefully are now emerging from the worst of this pandemic. So I'm going to ask each of you to provide a simple yes/no response to each of the questions. Okay, so the first one. Will your party develop a new and credible plan to halt and reverse nature loss, protect species at risk, and meet Canada's commitment to protect at least 30% of land, fresh water, and ocean by 2030? Aiden Kahanovitch?
Yes, our party is fully committed to creating a safe and diverse ecosystem, and that involves the protection of land, fresh water, and oceans.
Okay.
But it also includes the expansion of urban national parks.
Okay, thank you. Terry Duguid.
How long are these answers supposed to be, Lynn?
Well, yes, no, but you can, give a little bit of a detail if you want, but not much.
Well, yes, and I think most of the folks on this call would agree that we have 2 existential crises, climate change, and the other would be loss of biodiversity. We have a plan to protect at least 30% of our land, fresh water, and ocean by 2030, and we fully intend to implement it. Okay,
thank you. Greg Boettcher.
Yes, I think this is tantamount to what the Green Party stands for, so a resounding yes.
Okay, thanks very much. will you, this is the next question with pertaining to that preamble, will you commit to require all sectors to reduce carbon emissions by 60% by 2030 and make it law? We'll go in the same order. Aiden, your response, please. Brief, yes or no?
The NDP is committed to a target of meeting or cutting our emissions by at least half and reducing the heat targets by 1.5 degrees, at least by 2030.
By 30. So, but that would be 50% as opposed
Correct.
to 60. Okay, good to know. Thank you, Terry.
Lynn, I'm having trouble understanding the format. When do we get to the 2 minutes?
After
part?
this question.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think as everybody knows on the screen, we've recently upped our game and committed to 40 to 45% reduction. And that's an increase of 30% from the 30% mark that we committed to at Paris. We have a detailed and granular plan that is being implemented as we speak, and we will meet our Paris commitments and more.
Okay, thank you. And Greg.
Yes, this is directly out of the Green Party platform that we will adhere to the 60% or more.
By 2030.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is the last of the confusing questions. So once we're done with this one, we'll get into the regular format. Will you push your party's leadership to end all government subsidies for fossil fuels? Aiden?
Absolutely. We're committed to ending government subsidies for fossil fuels, but then also putting in legislation to make sure that future subsidies aren't created down the road.
Okay, thank you. Terry?
Yes, we're committed to eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. We've already eliminated 8, and the rest will be eliminated by 2023, 2 years earlier than first pledged.
Thank you. And Greg?
Yes, we are committed to removing any subsidies, and further, we're committed to transparency across industries, that we have full cycle costing for manufacturing and product goods.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we get into the regular format, and this will just be, I'm going to read you the question. You're going to have each candidate is going to have 2 minutes to respond, and I'm going to change the order of who goes first as we go through the rest of the questions. So this is your preamble. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act is our overarching law to protect the health and environment of Canadians. The Act has not been significantly amended since 1999, despite major changes in our understanding of toxic substances in our environment. A recent bill introduced in the last Parliament did not make it past first reading. Will you support getting this bill reintroduced, strengthened, and made a top legislative priority? And then also specifically, will you amend legislation to prioritize hotspot communities such as St. Boniface, Point Douglas, Weston, and hydro-affected First Nations? So 2 minutes, please, to respond. And Terry Duguid, could you go first, please?
Well, thank you, Lynn. The answer is absolutely, and I'm glad to receive this question. And as you mentioned, we introduced and strengthened the 1999 SEPA bill. Unfortunately, there was obstruction by the Conservatives, and so we just got to first reading. So we will absolutely reintroduce, strengthen, and expedite a modernized SEPA. We're open to improvements which come through the committee process and the parliamentary process. And when passed, it will enshrine the right to a healthy environment for the first time. We're committed to a full review of legislation governing the use of pesticides. We're committed to requiring consumer products such as cosmetics and cleaning products have clear labeling. We need to know what is in our products. We have a right to know. And we will be introducing legislation to phase out toxicity testing in animals. The point you raised about St. Boniface and other communities, other hotspots, I've been talking with Greg Sellinger, who's leading the charge in St. Boniface. We're working together And we're looking to see how those concerns of communities like St. Boniface can be incorporated into the SEBA bill.
Okay, thank you. Greg Boettcher, you're up next. 2 minutes, please.
Right, thank you very much. And yes, absolutely, we would be reintroducing that bill and strengthening it to make sure that the environment and issues such as clean water are addressed. That's one of the things that I think the Terry that the Liberal government had promised, I think in 2 different elections, is to get rid of boil water advisories for all of our First Nations. I think you've managed 2 nations, and that is a little bit short of the target. We need to have clean drinking water for all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And Aiden Kahanovitch, please, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm committed to expanding environmental protections and ensuring that all Canadians have, ensuring the rights of all Canadians to have access to clean water, air, and land. The new Democratic Party is committed to not only reintroducing Bill C-28, but enhancing it, particularly when it comes to the environmental impact assessments for new coal mines and for mine expansions. And part of our model is really about getting tough on big polluters and big corporations that may leave inactive wells that are subject to potential toxins that leach into the soil, and making sure that those corporations are really held responsible for making sure that they clean up those sites. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Aiden.
Lynn, do we get to
Do we have we used up time here, Greg? Do we have a few seconds? Okay, so I guess each of you can take another, what, 20 seconds?
Yeah, I was just maybe correct the record to my good friend, my new friend, Greg. 75% of the boil water advisories have been eliminated. That's 109. And there are treatment plants, water treatment plants under construction in every other community except 2, and those will be underway shortly.
Okay,
that's good to hear.
Greg?
Yeah, that's good to hear. And specifically, Winnipeg's water comes from Shoal Lake. How are we doing there?
Well, we built Freedom Road, which gives that First Nation access. And my understanding is their boil water advisory has been eliminated. But the situation, I think you'd agree, Greg, and Aiden would as well, that we were taking our water from their territory. Absolutely unacceptable that they had to boil their water for so many years.
Okay, Aiden, did you want to get in on this before we move on?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Okay, good discussion. Thanks. This next section we're going to get into consists of, oh, sorry, no, I've got this one last question, number 3. I don't know if you're going to need 2 minutes to respond to it, but you can take the 2 minutes if you like. The question is, will you join the All-Party Climate Caucus and work collaboratively with MPs from across the aisle on policy solutions? Greg Boettcher, would you take that first, please?
Yes, we will. And I think that that's one of the areas that, as I had alluded to earlier, has brought me into politics. One of the things that I think all Canadians are seeing is a bit of dysfunction in parliamentary procedures. There's not enough cooperation, making sure that the government is getting things done. Clearly, when the Canadian people have provided a minority mandate, we expect that the government works to achieve goals within that mandate, including not necessarily calling an early election, which I don't think most of Canadians, I think most Canadians would agree that, calling an election on a minority mandate after 2 years is not really what the Canadian people wanted. It's expensive. It's not necessarily appropriate to be doing that in in the lead times of a COVID, or at least hopefully lead times of a COVID pandemic. And yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Aiden, could you take it, please? And you can take the 2 minutes if you like.
Thank you very much. Yes, I will definitely work with anyone who is seriously committed to bringing about a meaningful change. I work on a principle of working together with individuals and with communities in a collaborative fashion. And so, you know, if we're going to see any real gain in climate change, it's going to be working together collaboratively, and that crosses all party lines, but it also involves including communities and community partners, and not just MP representatives that are working together for their own specific mandates and policies.
Okay, good. Thank you, Aiden. And then Terry Duguid, you've got 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, the answer is yes. And climate change, as my colleagues have referenced, should not be a partisan issue. Unfortunately, we can't be naive about this. You know, the Green Party, the NDP Party, the Liberal Party believe in climate change and believe we should be doing something about it, and believe that climate change is a crisis. We have different ways of going about it. I feel we have the best plan. It has been blessed by Andrew Weaver, the Green Party leader, former Green Party leader in BC, as well as the former NDP leader, Thomas Mulcair. But there's one person who isn't here tonight, Melanie Maher from the Conservative Party, I guess our PPC candidate as well, who, you know, they have no concrete plan to tackle climate change. They voted against the Net Zero Accountability Act, and really conservatives across the country have stood in the way of climate action, and that really is unfortunate.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to shut down this section, and we're going to move into the next one, which consists of questions that have come from local environmentalists regarding Manitoba-specific issues. And the first one comes from Ann Lindsay, Concerned Citizens of Manitoba, and it concerns small modular nuclear reactors. Anne says, we are in a climate emergency that demands immediate action to change the ways we use and obtain energy. The nuclear industry is promoting so-called small modular nuclear reactors as part of the solution, and the previous Liberal government has already been generously subsidizing this as yet unproven strategy and is openly advancing it, even though the cheapest, fastest, and most dependable ways to reduce our carbon footprint are efficiency, wind, solar, and geothermal. The proposed new reactors will be more expensive per unit of energy generated and will produce more radioactive waste per unit of energy than even conventional large reactors. They will be fueled by materials suitable for nuclear weapon proliferation, violating the spirit of Canada's international commitments. Moreover, they are still in the design stage and would not be available for commercial use until later this decade at the earliest, unlike other solutions which are all ready to go immediately. So Anne's question is, should Canadian taxpayers subsidize the design, development, and construction of new nuclear reactors? Terry Duguid, would you take that please first?
Well, I'm a big fan of Ann Lindsay, who I know from her days at the Manitoba Eco Network, I think an Order of Manitoba recipient, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know about her characterization, however, about generously subsidizing. My understanding is there's one or more pilot projects going on. Anne is right. These are just very much in the design research stage. But I would agree with her. We need to focus the effort on energy efficiency, renewables, attacking methane from landfills like the Brady landfill site, and of course attacking oil and gas methane as well, which is a very, very powerful greenhouse gas. I'm not prepared to take any technology off the table, but I would want to know the cost, the environmental impact, and the effectiveness of reducing emissions. And that's exactly what pilot projects are all about.
Okay, thank you. Greg Boettcher.
It's clearly the traditional first and second generation nuclear facilities were demonstrably unsafe and produced radioactive waste. There's a lot of research that's been going on into new ways of making use of nuclear energy that doesn't have those same sort of effects. I'm not sure where Ms. Lindsay is getting her research, but I think that it may not be entirely complete. Ultimately, what we really need to do is, as a global society, I think the panacea is nuclear fusion, right? So, and that produces water hydrogen as a helium as a byproduct, and that's ultimately where we want to be. There's a few large scale research projects into that, one in Europe, one in the United States, and that's ultimately where we want to go. In terms of the electrical grid, I think we've seen that the electrical grid is fragile, and as climate change impacts become more severe, one of the things that we need to do is indeed have the ability to distribute power more broadly across Canada, and at the same time have local generation and storage capacity. Thank you.
Okay. Aiden Kahanovitch, please, 2 minutes.
Thank you. No, Canadian tax dollars should not be spent towards research and development in this fashion. It really should be going towards making sustainable green energy both affordable and accessible for individuals and for corporations. Manitoba is known for two big things, wide open fields and a lot of sun. And so we have the capacity here within the province to really build sustainable green energy systems. And part of the challenge is that a lot of that is not necessarily affordable or accessible to everyday consumers. For example, I looked into putting solar panels on my home, and after doing a cost analysis, it would actually take 30 to 40 years for us to start to see returns on that investment. And so that's something that's not necessarily affordable for most Manitobans. And so I think our tax dollars really need to be going towards creating something that's a little bit more sustainable and affordable for everyone.
Okay, thank you. The next question, the second question in this series, is from Dennis Leneveau from What the Frack, Manitoba, and it's on the silical sand industry. Here's the preamble. The Impact Assessment Agency of Canada is currently reviewing new information from Can White Sands regarding the Vivian silica sand extraction process. Nearly 500 new wells will be drilled each year in southeastern Manitoba to extract the silica sand, which is located 200 feet underground. Impacts will include massive ground slumps, exposure to the aquifers from surface pollution sources, and leaching of toxics from acid rock drainage due to large amounts of aerated, re-injected water. Here's your question. What role would you recommend the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada play in the Can White Sands project, given that the current provincial government is not conducting a full-blown environmental assessment with the Clean Environment Commission's hearing? So Aiden Kahanovitch, would you take that first, please?
Sure, thank you. So the Impact Assessment Agency really needs to play a key role in coordinating with local levels of government, Indigenous communities, and the province to ensure that really long-term assessment is conducted and making sure that a recovery strategy is put in place for a lot of those projects to ensure that we reduce or eliminate the risk of toxins leaching into our watershed. Ultimately, I think the agency itself needs to really be playing a role where it's overseeing and coordinating, but providing resources to those groups so that things like the province can move ahead with these projects in a safe way.
Thank you, Aiden. Terry Duguid, you're up next, please.
Well, thanks, Lynn. And Glenn Corlick and I spent some time together when I was the chair of the Manitoba Clean Environment Commission, and I know their role, and I know the good job they can do on reviewing initiatives like this. And so it's a shame they're not doing their job. And I would urge them, that's the provincial government, to do their job and give a reference to the Clean Environment Commission to let them do their job. And I mean, this is not unusual for conservative governments. They gutted environmental assessment legislation when they were in power federally. They gutted the Fisheries Act. And what I've heard on this particular initiative, and I've been reading the newspapers like everybody else, but I've been getting some information recently. I think this is the new information that you referred to, and it is very concerning. And so, the Federal Environmental Assessment Agency is looking at that. It is an independent agency, and I will certainly support a full environmental review if that is their direction.
Okay, thank you. And Greg Boettcher, you're next, please.
Yeah, I think that the impact assessment needs to continue and ensure that impacts to the environment don't take place. We recognize that resource extraction is something that's necessary for modern society, but if we can't do it in a clean and sustainable way, then we need to consider that the costs are simply too high and it shouldn't be adopted. Agencies should perhaps have a little bit more binding power to ensure that the environment is put ahead of political concerns.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on now to a question on Lake Winnipeg, and it's from the Lake Winnipeg Foundation and Lake Winnipeg Indigenous Collective. Lake Winnipeg is full of spirit, as important as our most cherished relatives. Despite decades of government commitments to heal the lake, there has been little follow-through. Lake Winnipeg's health continues to decline. Since 2008, the federal government has made dedicated financial investments for Lake Winnipeg. These investments have enabled phosphorus reduction initiatives, as well as research and monitoring to improve water quality in Lake Winnipeg. The current federal funding commitment, Phase 3 of the Lake Winnipeg Basin Program, will end March in 2022. Here's your question. Will you and your party renew the Lake Winnipeg Basin Program budget in 2022? And how will you ensure that federal dollars have measurable impact to reverse the decline of Lake Winnipeg? Terry Duguid, could you go first, please?
Well, sure, and I'm really happy to answer this question in the affirmative. The Prime Minister has assigned me, along with the Environment Minister, the freshwater file. So we absolutely will renew the Lake Winnipeg program. $25.7 million over 5 years is the current program. That is clearly inadequate. And in this campaign, in our platform, which I played a role in shaping, we've announced a freshwater action plan of $1 billion, $100 million a year over 10 years to renew, to modernize the Canada Water Act. But very, very importantly, we are going to scale up the Lake Winnipeg Basin program, and that's the entire watershed, not just confined within the province of Manitoba, but from the Rocky Mountains over to Lake of the Woods down into four U.S. states. And also we're making major investments, as I hate to keep referring to Glenn Corlick, but we know each other well. Phase 1 of the North End treatment plant, a major investment of several $100 million. Phase 2, our money is on the table, the province's is not. The city is cooperating with us, and we need to get that advanced sewage treatment, which I recommended, by the way, as chair of the Manitoba Clean Environment Commission in 2003 on the advice of one of the folks on the screen today.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Greg Boettcher, you have 2
Yeah.
minutes, please.
Thank you. And I think that the Green Party would definitely be renewing support for the Lake Winnipeg Basin budget. And further, I think that a lot more investment needs to take place. The issue with Lake Winnipeg is a broad one, as Terry mentioned, across the entire watershed. The complicating factor is that a good 2/3 of the watershed is south of us in the United States, and we have international treaties that cover waterways. They have not been adhered to, and that's something that I think we need to work internationally on to ensure that our waters are clean and safe, and that we're not dumping pollutants into the water. For example, there's fracking going on in South Dakota, where that water is seeping into the Red River watershed, and that, for example, needs to cease. And there are treaties that actually prescribe that sort of seepage, and we need to enforce that. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And Aiden Kahanovitch?
Yes, in terms of the renewal of the budget for 2022, but I think it needs to go one step further, and it needs to be multi-year funding. It doesn't need needs to be something that can be a long-term vision. And in order for us to see results, really is we need that large oversight. As it's been mentioned, the Lake Winnipeg watershed covers 4 provinces, and that covers then 4 different provincial bodies. And so there's a lot of different layers to where that funding may go. And as a result, we need to be able to look at data from all of those different groups and not just work in isolation. And if we're going to really have a sustainable impact, we need to cooperate really on a national level.
Lynn, could I make one comment based on my colleagues' comments?
Do we have time, Glenn? Okay, go ahead. Then
Yeah,
the others
so
will have the same chance. Yeah.
Sure. I just want to give a shout out to the Lake Winnipeg based community-based monitoring program, which collects data so that we can target those phosphorus hotspots that are really contributing to the polluting of Lake Winnipeg. And you know, like Aiden, I believe the program should be long-term. And so that's why we are proposing a 10-year program. That is what I am going to be advocating for the Lake Winnipeg Basin program, and a very, very targeted approach. So we hit those nutrient hotspots, and a shout out to the Lake Winnipeg Foundation who put forward the question tonight.
Okay, thank you. Aiden, did you want to respond back? And then Greg, you will have a chance as well.
No, nothing else to add currently.
Okay, Greg?
Yeah, I think the notion of monitoring is one that is absolutely essential, and I think we need to be monitoring not just hotspots in Lake Manitoba, but all along the Red River Basin, and in particular in the southern Pembina Valley, where the waters are entering Canada. We need to make sure that water is at an acceptable quality level when it enters Canada. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Now, that question and your responses actually feed very well into our next question, which is about cooperative federalism. And this question comes from Heather Fast of Manitoba Eco Network. The preamble is as follows. Canada is a federation in which the responsibilities for managing resources and the environment are shared among different levels of government, as all of you have pointed out with this issue with Lake Winnipeg. This shared governance model is a source of strength, but it also creates fragmentation and gaps that adversely affects the health of our environment. Since the environment is an area of shared jurisdiction, with provincial governments often having the most legal control, it can be very difficult to get international commitments made by the federal government. Things like UNDRIP, biodiversity, the Paris Accord, carbon neutrality by 2050. And it's difficult to get all of these things addressed at the provincial level. So the question is, how does your party plan to encourage and or influence provincial governments to incorporate and help meet Canada's international environmental commitments at the provincial level? And Aiden Kahanovitch, I have you going first, please.
Thank you very much. So as a party that's historically been a partner in coalitions and working with multiple levels of government, the NDP are committed to working collaboratively with the province and with local groups. Ultimately, things like penalties aren't likely to work in terms of incentive for the province. And really what we need to do is look at how we can show the province the economic benefits of a lot of these initiatives, whether that's through investment within the local community, investment within our Indigenous groups, and how that can really help benefit the province as a whole on an economic scale. That's really the only way that we're going to get through to our current provincial government, really in terms of talking about sort of what the financial incentive is for the province.
Okay, thank you, Aiden. Terry Duguid, 2 minutes.
Sure. You know, Canada is a federation, so it's often difficult to get things done because of the split jurisdiction. We had the Pan-Canadian framework where every province but one, Saskatchewan, signed on to the Paris Agreement and hitting targets together. And then what happened? Conservative governments came to power in a number of different provinces, and they wanted to walk back our commitments and reduce our commitment to reduce greenhouse gases. And that is unfortunate. Conservative governments took us all the way to the Supreme Court and lost. And so we found a way to get around that with a price on pollution that is applicable Canada-wide. We have some new mechanisms that we have to introduce. So one for fresh water is the Canada Water Agency, again, a split jurisdiction, but the Canada Water Agency will play a role in bringing provinces, territories, municipalities, Indigenous governments, and stakeholders together, as well as working across international boundaries. And it's something that I'm leading for the federal government, and I think will be a model for how we can work together to get things done on the environment, particularly for ecosystems like the Great Lakes and Lake Winnipeg, where, again, there's shared jurisdiction, shared boundaries, but there's no getting around. We need to work together to restore the health of Lake Winnipeg and the Great Lakes and other watersheds.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Greg Boettcher, you're up next.
Thank you. And we've been talking a little bit about the economics, and I think one of the things that is missing from the discussion is an understanding of what the actual dollars and cents are cost to the economy. How much does it actually cost in terms of healthcare and other issues when we inject pollution into our environment? So we need to cost that out properly and understand what it's costing in our economy, and then start adopting appropriate measures that don't follow the current model of private profit and public risk. We see that in so many areas across Canada, where corporations are making the profit and the Canadian taxpayer is left footing the bill after corporations have left a mess in their wake. A good example that Aiden had mentioned earlier is abandoned wells. The profit was made off of that, and the cost of cleanup is now being borne by the people of Canada, and that's something that has to be established as an unacceptable practice. We should be ensuring that when there is resource extraction, that funds are established right from the outset that address any kind of liability and cleanup. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And just for a follow-up, you feel there would be a way to implement that federally on the provinces? Is there some sort of a structure that you are thinking, or a policy that you're thinking? And I'll give everybody a chance to respond to this question too, because I feel like when you're thinking of places like Alberta that have got the methane gas leaking from the wells, and that's ends up affecting everybody. But so how do we deal with that when that's a provincial issue? And I'll give everybody a chance to respond to this.
Who's going first?
Would you go ahead, Greg, because you're the one who kind of twigged it in my mind when you were speaking.
Right. And, I suppose as with any issue, you can adopt a carrot and stick approach, to be blunt. Hopefully you can get all of the levels of interests in a jurisdiction involved and cooperating. At the same time, we know that there are going to be groups that are not interested, and usually for this because they are currently profiting from that particular pollution or non-environmentally acceptable practice, and that needs to be curtailed. When we're negotiating with provinces and working with provinces, all of these factors need to be taken into account, and applying dollars and cents to them. So, the federal government works with provinces and gives over a lot of federal money. Well, let's put a dollar cost on that. If the provinces are not willing to follow the guidance, then that a cost should be associated with that, and we should look at saying, well, okay, this money is money that is needs to come out of the economy at some point, and if you're not willing to adhere, then that perhaps should come out of transfer payments. Again, that's
now we're getting to something perhaps a little more, some concrete ideas. So that's thank you for that, Greg. Aiden, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, thank you. So in terms of the specific policy, I can't really comment, but the thing that I think we need to think about is that a lot of the lands that we're talking about are lands that are part of First Nations communities. And I think our Indigenous populations really need to be part of whatever policy is developed and whatever plans are put in place in terms of how we're going to work with the federal government and the provincial government and First Nations communities. So I can't say a specific plan, but just commenting that our Indigenous partners have to be part of that plan from day one.
Okay, thank you, Aiden. Terry?
Yeah, I think both Greg and Aiden made some really good points. To Greg, using the federal spending power, we have that stick, right? We essentially went around the provinces and directly to people on the price on pollution, the so-called carbon tax. But also, and I'll use an example from Manitoba, where we use the low carbon economy fund. Those are federal funds to incent the province to come to the table to work with the trucking industry to lower their emissions. And I think to Aiden's point on First Nations, on conservation, provinces and territories have been very reluctant to come to the table to set aside protected areas because they want to develop resources, and that's legitimate. But who has been our best partner? First Nations, and we've set aside some land the size of Nova Scotia because we have had First Nations and Métis people and Inuit as full and equal partners.
Okay, thank you very much, all three of you, because I think it's a question that really it's a difficult question, and it's something that we have to deal with. So I do appreciate you taking a deeper dive on that question. I'm going to turn now to a question from Eric Reeder from the Wilderness Community, and it's about Canada's peatlands. And this is actually a question that I feel very strongly about. Peatlands are the most carbon-rich lands on the planet. Canada has vast expanses of peatlands, with the great portion of them being in Manitoba. The highly acclaimed international organization Project Drawdown has called the protection of peatlands one of the top actions to halt greenhouse gas emissions and reverse global warming. The ISD, or the International Institute for Sustainable Development, has stated there is no way to mitigate the release of carbon from disturbed peatlands. Right now, there are no regulations or restrictions on the destruction, development, or harvest of peat, a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions. We have witnessed the industrial harvesting of peat on the west shore of Lake Winnipeg by at least 3 corporations, and the attendant clear cutting of the forest so the corporations can have access to vast tracts of peat. When I was on holidays up in that area, just south of Matheson Island, I saw a constant stream of 18-wheelers transporting peat on Provincial Road 234. And at the same time, you could hardly see the road from our cabin because of the smoke from the forest fires. So the smoke was so thick you could hardly see what was going on, yet they were removing, you know, the most significant source of a carbon sink in the area. The question is, how will your government regulate the greenhouse gas emissions caused by peat mining and the disturbance of this valuable natural ecosystem? Greg Boettcher, would you like to take it first, please?
Yeah, so in this particular case, the science is clear. Clearly, we have to cease the harvesting of peat immediately. It's simply not economically viable or sustainable. And this is a classic example of what I was referring to earlier about private profit and public risk. The risk is being borne by not only Manitobans, but because the air flows around the globe, everybody's paying for this. And we need to ensure that we are not releasing additional carbon that has been sequestered for millions and hundreds of millions of years further into the atmosphere. Since the Industrial Revolution, we have in about 200 years released sequestered carbon that has been in place for hundreds of millions of years, and we've released gigatons of that into the atmosphere. That is going to have an impact now, and we're feeling that, and it will continue to have an impact for easily the next 1,000 years. And that's something that, you know, as stewards of the planet, we have to take a lot much better care of our environment and stop messing with the fragile place we have on this planet. Thank you.
Okay, Aiden Kahanovitch, would you like to take a stab at this question? How will government regulate the greenhouse gases?
Thank you. So an NDP government would look at what best practices there are in other jurisdictions, whether that's outside of Manitoba on a provincial setting or internationally. And we would really need to sort of gather information in terms of the data and the facts, like Greg mentioned. You know, the science speaks for itself, and really look at building restrictions and regulations that address a lot of those issues. Like Greg mentioned, it really comes down to private businesses profiting on land that has a longer term impact than we can really see. And so we need to really write regulations that are based on those longer term visions, in fact.
Thank you, Aiden. Terry Duguid.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm going to speak for myself, not for the government here. This is a bit of an up close and personal issue for me. When I was an undergraduate biology student, I worked for a graduate student who was studying the Maher bog, and it's a protected area just outside of Ottawa. It's a pretty traditional boreal bog, and I knew every plant species, every mammal, and I knew their Latin names. And this was my project over the summer. And peatlands are very specialized plant and animal communities. They are very fragile. We need to conserve them in their own right, but as you've mentioned, they're an enormous storehouse of carbon, and they are not a renewable resource. You know, my understanding is there's major extraction operations here in Manitoba, but I think I read about a giant one in Alberta not very long ago. And I think you've heard, some of you have heard that we have this global coalition that we're part of, Powering Past Coal. Perhaps we should have another coalition, Powering Past Peat, because for all the reasons my colleagues have mentioned, it is very, very important to preserve those storehouses of carbon, not only for the sake of greenhouse gas emission reductions, but also because they are very special environments that we need to conserve in their own right.
Okay, thank you. Our next question came from the Manitoba Eco Network, and it has a question on pension plan divestment. According to a recent National Observer investigative report, the Canada Pension Plan, or CPP, manages the pensions of 20 million Canadians, and it cites research conducted by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives in BC, and found that the CPP has increased the number of shares it owns in fossil fuel companies since Canada signed the Paris Agreement 5 years ago. The CPP's total fossil fuel investment across its entire portfolio have increased from 9.9 billion in 2016 to 11.6 billion in 2020. Here's your question. What role do you see the government in regulating federal institutions, which includes financial institutions like pension funds and government agencies, to make Canada a climate leader? Terry Duguid, would you take that first, please?
Yeah, so I think we have to be a little bit careful here because the Canada Pension Plan is independent of government. Governments come and go. The CPP and the board go on forever. The government does play a role. I would think that the CPP would see the writing on the wall that we are in a transition and that they would make sensible decisions that will account for that transition that we know is taking place rapidly, actually. But our government has committed to develop a plan to phase out public financing of the fossil fuel sector, including from Crown corporations such as the Export Development Canada and some of our other Crown corporations. So we know that, again, we know that we're in this transition. We know that it needs to be a just transition. We know that we need to move to a low carbon economy. And I support all of our federal institutions heading in that direction.
Thank you. Greg Boettcher.
Thank you. And I think that this is an issue that we see across the financial community. We're, as Canadians, the vast majority of us are invested in mutual funds. The CPP is effectively the mutual fund that is held by all Canadians. And as you know, let's call it, as shareholders within these investments, we should have a voice in how the funds are being managed, and we should be working with investment houses, and in particular with the CPP board to help them understand how their investment can be brought into a better green perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Aiden Kahanovitch.
Thank you very much. So if we're going to really enact real change, the federal government needs to get out of the business of funding fossil fuels, whether that's through subsidies, bailouts, buying pipelines, or investments. And while, like Terry mentioned, the CPP is an independent body. We, as the federal government, would need to have some influence on how the CPP is run and managed, whether that's through cooperation and discussion with the board, or providing incentives for the CPP to be investing in green energy instead. As things start to decline with fossil fuels and our reliance on them, green energy is going to be a big thing that we need to start investing in, and the CPP can just be one of those multiple groups that's investing in the future.
Okay, thank you, Aiden. Our next question is about hydroelectricity in Manitoba, and it comes from Ni Ska Tan, which is an alliance of hydro-impacted communities. And your preamble is, in Manitoba, about 96% of all electricity is generated by hydro dams, with 70% of the total coming from dams on the Nelson River alone. Despite claims that this source of energy is green, environmental impacts from the dams are disproportionately felt by northern Manitoba Indigenous communities, while the majority of power is consumed in Winnipeg without the accompanying impacts. So the question is, what plan does your party have to increase access to alternative forms of renewable energy? Aiden Kahanovitch?
So as I mentioned earlier, the NDP is committed to putting funds towards the development of green and sustainable resources such as wind and solar. And within Manitoba, we have those resources in abundance. And so really that plan is looking at where we can fund subsidies to allow that for more personal use, but also on a larger scale so that we can create a system that's usable and sustainable by all. Ultimately, Manitoba Hydro is a powerhouse here in the province, no pun intended. And ultimately, it's going to be working with them as a partner to look at alternate sources of energy and how we can transition hydro to be, a partner in that development.
Okay, thank you, Aiden. Terry Duguid, please.
Well, hydro development started in the 60s and 70s with the NDP and Ed Schreier, and frankly, we, while we benefit from cheap and there can be an argument about how clean, but it was a disaster for First Nations in our north for continuing to pay compensation, and those communities were impacted greatly. We're doing hydro developments in a very different way. Again, as chair of the Clean Environment Commission, I participated in the hearings surrounding the Wasquatum Dam. The Nelson House First Nation was an equity partner. The elders incorporated traditional knowledge into the development. It became much smaller than hydro wanted. It is generating clean power. We are essentially off coal in this province. I mean, you can't take everything off the table and meet our greenhouse gas targets. The sun doesn't shine all the time. The wind doesn't blow all the time. Hydro is going to be an incredibly important part of our energy mix, getting to net zero. But First Nations, Métis people, Inuit people need to be full partners. They need to have a say in the design, and importantly, we need to incorporate their ways of knowing, traditional knowledge, into how we design and build these facilities.
Thank you. Greg Boettcher?
Yeah, and I think in this regard, I agree with Terry. We need to work with the nations that are impacted, and at the same time understand that each form, society, our modern society runs on energy, and a lot of that is electrical energy. We're not going to go back to whale oil candle power. That's simply not going to work out for us. What we need to do is look at a multi-pronged strategy where we're consuming much less power, and that includes things like continuing to, and you know, Manitoba Hydro has been on the forefront of this, is introducing LED lights, for example, and that's just one example of a lot of ways of reducing consumption. Insulation for our homes is reducing consumption, and then understanding that you know, hydropower, while it's impactful, is perhaps not the worst polluter, but we need to diversify. As I'd mentioned earlier, one of the things that we need to look at is improving the electrical grid in Canada. You know, Manitoba Hydro has lines that go south, but we don't have lines that go east and west. And these lines need to be built so that we can share power and consume power, you know, bidirectionally from our neighbors to the east and the west, and then continue to diversify. You know, one of the things that we saw this summer because of climate change was a significant drought in Manitoba. Aquifers are way down. They're down by you know, feet in terms of major aquifers. The rain has not been coming, and we need to diversify where our electricity is coming from.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Now this next question is, it's almost, it's very related to the question that we just had, and it perhaps will give you an opportunity to go just a little deeper into this topic. It comes from the Manitoba Energy Justice Coalition, and it's about the just transition. And they give the preamble that many Indigenous communities in northern Manitoba continue to face not only environmental impacts related to hydropower, but also social, economic, and cultural impacts. And you've all outlined that quite nicely, I thought. But communities have been relocated due to intentional flooding, traditional land-based economies have suffered, and burial sites have also been disturbed. Now, despite these impacts, most northern residents continue to pay some of the highest electricity bills in the province. How will your party then deliver a just transition that includes Indigenous peoples and addresses environmental racism? Greg Boettcher, would you start off, please?
Certainly, and you know, part of the challenge here is that you know, we here in Manitoba, we're currently perhaps saying suffering under a conservative government is not putting it too strongly, and the so it would be related to an earlier question, where how is the federal government going to work with provincial governments to ensure that items of deep concern to constituents are being addressed that are under provincial jurisdiction. So I think that then that comes back to you know, that approach where we need to cost out very accurately the cost to people of the pollution that's being created, and the environmental impacts that are being created, and understand that we need to achieve equity across all of the, for example, Manitoba Hydro consumers. Yeah, if you're being impacted, you know, and I know very well that northern residents are paying a much higher rate for electricity, and that needs to be balanced out. Thank you.
Thank you. Aiden Kahanovitch, please.
Thank you. So Greg mentioned that we really need to look at how we can share energy on sort of an east-west sort of spectrum to our neighbors. And part of that comes from as we generate more energy, of course, we can then sell that energy to our neighbors. And we do that right now to our neighbors to the south. And I think one of the biggest things that we need to do is look at where those funds go once we sell that energy. And those resources, those funds really need to go back to Indigenous communities that have seen this impact from the creation of hydroelectric dams. Ultimately, those communities are the ones who need to really benefit from the new developments, the new energy that we're able to either produce internally or that we can sell externally. So ultimately, I think it'll be about creating partnerships with those First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities, and also working with the province to ensure that those transfers are able to take place.
Okay, thank you, Aiden. And Terry, could you give us your response, please?
Sure. We're very focused on the just transition, so much so that we're going to introduce a Just Transition Act. We know that geothermal is exploding in growth on the prairies, hydrogen, but the workers in the oil patch need new skills to take advantage of these jobs. So we have to invest in people as well as infrastructure. And many of these communities, and I've been speaking to a number of them, one is Hanna, Alberta, which is getting off of coal, but we need to diversify the economies of these communities, and not just for the working men in the mines, but also for the women who also have to go back to work because two incomes are needed to support the family. The East-West power grid, I like that my colleagues have mentioned that. I think Manitoba really has something to offer in terms of decarbonizing the West, and we are doing that by making investments in the East-West power grid. In terms of Indigenous peoples and governments, how do you prevent some of these major disruptions and negative effects and impacts on their communities? Well, they have to be at the table in water planning. They have to be at the table in hydro planning. Lenore Zan, our MP from Nova Scotia, has introduced an environmental racism private members bill, which we think can fit very nicely as a companion to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, because everyone should have a right to a healthy environment, and it's often been the most vulnerable, the most remote in our province that have suffered the environmental impacts of industry, hydro developments, flooding, and some of the things that you mentioned.
Okay, thanks. Now I've come to the end of the questions here, and I think we have got some questions from the audience. And Matt, as per our discussion, I got confused about where I would find those. Would they just be in the Q&A? Okay, here it is. Direct message. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Matt. I don't know what I'd do without him. Okay, this question is from Shirley Thompson, and she wants to know what your position is on canceling the Keystone XL pipeline, and what would you do to make this happen? Let's start with Aiden, please.
Shirley, for the question. My view is that we don't need anything in any future. We're going to be moving forward saying that it
for me, you're really fading in and out, Aiden. Is it just me, or is that happening for everybody?
Yeah, can't hear Aiden.
Shoot.
All right, can you hear me a little bit better now?
That's better now. Yeah, can you start over?
Certainly. So thank you very much, Shirley, for the question. Ultimately, if we're going to move forward, we can't be doing the same thing over and over again. And we can't be investing in the creation of new pipelines, including Keystone XL. And so ultimately, we need to divert that funding and those resources elsewhere. And so ultimately, I would push forward to ending projects like Keystone XL and also future developments so that we can start really putting resources towards the development of new green sustainable.
Okay, thank you, Aiden. Terry Duguid, please.
Well, I hope the questioner knows this, but the Keystone XL pipeline is canceled, and President Biden has made his decision clear. We've accepted the decision, and I think everyone has moved on.
Okay, Greg, do you have anything to add?
No, thanks, Terry. You're absolutely right. That's what I was going to mention was that President Biden has canceled that. This project is thankfully dead in the water, and now we can look to taking any sorts of investment funds and redirecting them. And hopefully in the future, we won't be buying any more pipelines from private industry to just hand money to them and have that come out of the public purse.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is from Deborah Wall. The animal agriculture industry has a devastating impact on our planet. Besides producing suffering, it produces more greenhouse gases than all forms of transportation combined. It's responsible for environmental degradation, habitat and species loss, ocean acidification and dead zones, wastes vast amounts of fresh water, and is leading to the rise of antibiotic resistant superbugs, which has the potential to cause the next pandemic. What is your party's position on the damage the industry is doing? Aiden, could you take that? Did you go first last time? Sorry, I'm losing track here. Sorry. Okay. Greg, why don't you take it? We'll go backwards this time.
Sure, and we absolutely need to stop the suffering of animals. I think that in other jurisdictions, such as European jurisdictions, we've seen where a return to sustainable farming really has a strong impact on not only being able to treat animals in a more respectful fashion, but also allows us to maintain our arable land. One of the things that hasn't come up is that arable land, at least in North America, is being depleted. Every time you create a crop, and worse, put artificial fertilizers on there, which then leach into places like Lake Winnipeg, you are depleting that soil. I read a report that suggested we have about 50 crop cycles left in the arable land if we continue to treat it the way it is. One of the ways to address that is a return to sustainable farming, which does include farm animals. The best fertilizer in the world is having ruminant animals eat fodder crops and fertilize the land. And when you rotate in that fashion, you don't have nearly the amount of carbon impact to the environment, and you're now achieving a much more sustainable crop yield and able to have not only healthier people but healthier animals. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Terry, could you give your thoughts, please?
Yeah, I like some of the things I just heard from Greg, sustainable farming, and I've been certainly talking with agricultural groups and farm groups who are working very, very hard to lower their carbon footprint. No-till, low-till agriculture to store carbon, and I think we have to work with farmers. I think farmers so often, and it's not true, are seen as the enemy of the environment. And many of the farmers I know, they want to they want to act on more sustainable practices. I like the ALICE program, Alternative Land Use Services, where farmers provide ecological goods and services such as carbon storage, flood control, and nutrient management. And there are some very good things happening in animal welfare and in the agricultural sector, where, I'll use an example. The beef industry is working with Bird Canada because the prairie actually benefits from grazing. It's the most endangered ecosystem in Canada. 1% of it is left. And, farmers, ranchers are working with the folks who are concerned about endangered species to ensure that those lands are grazed in a sustainable way. And I think we all know that grass-fed Manitoba beef is a very good product that isn't much in demand.
Okay, and Aiden, could you give your response, please? Oh, are you on mute?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, so far so good. Keep going.
Perfect. So I think Greg made some sustainable farming and how it's really the direction that we need to go in. Over the last few years, we've seen a huge surge in demand for things like the Beyond Meat burgers. And, moving to something that is a little bit more plant-based is something that's going to be really part of the future. And I think that's something that we want to promote. I can't necessarily speak in terms of sort of the party recognizing that, but I think ultimately, if we want to shift to something that's more long-term sustainable, we really need to look at sort of plant-based alternatives, but also look at ways that we can do sustainable farming and in a more eco-friendly way.
Okay, thank you.
Lynne,
do we have? Oh, sorry.
Can I add one thing? And just
Sure.
again, I'm not
okay. Another 20 seconds each.
okay. And just I want to agree with Aiden. Plant-based protein is just huge, and we've invested in the protein industries cluster in Western Canada. That's peas and lentils, and we have two plants, one in Manitoba and another in Saskatchewan, Rockford, I believe it's called, in Saskatchewan, and Merritt here. These are $200 and $300 million plants that are turning plant protein into Beyond Meat and other products that are, I think many people argue, are more sustainable and are also creating a lot of employment, and we're exporting these products around the world because there is a demand for plant-based protein. So again, many good things are happening in agriculture, and I think we have to acknowledge that and pay our respects to farmers who are taking this direction.
Okay, Aiden, would you like to add anything?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Okay, how about you, Greg?
Yeah, thank you. I had neglected to talk about antibiotic resistance. I think that that's a huge concern. One of the challenges that we're seeing in health, a good example is the current pandemic and the SARS-CoV-2 virus and its mutations. When we aren't vaccinated, we leave pools of people where the vaccine can, or the virus can still proliferate. One of the challenges with antibiotics in feed is that just creates a reservoir for viruses and bacteria, and we know that there's zoonotic transfer between animals and people. That's why we call it the bird flu, for example, because it came from birds. So we need to stop giving antibiotics as a prophylactic measure to our animals. Sustainable farming practices where animals are given the space to grow reduces the need for that kind of prophylactic measure, and we need to avoid creating the next reservoir for the next pandemic, because when we have antibiotic resistant infections, that is something that we aren't prepared for as a global society. We don't have anything better than antibiotics, so we need to address that right away.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Now, I'm looking at the time and I'm cognizant that, Terry, I think you need to be out of here by 8:30, is that correct?
Mhm.
And you each need to have 2 minutes to give your concluding remarks. So I think we have time for one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over so that you each have your 2 minutes to give your closing comments. This question is from Jordan McPeak. How big of a concern is the federal debt when designing your climate plan? Do you see a point when a debt crisis could be bigger than the climate crisis? Terry, could you take that one off, please?
Yeah, we've done what it takes to get Canadians through this health crisis that we've been through, the worst health crisis in 100 years. And so it was either we take on the debt or burden families and businesses with that debt, and we chose that. That said, we have the best debt to GDP ratio in the entire G7, much better than the United States, much better than a number of European countries. And so our debt is manageable. Money is very cheap because there are low interest rates, some of the lowest in recorded history. What I would argue is there are environmental debts and deficits that we have to pay attention to. We need to get a handle on the climate crisis because it is a climate crisis. It's costing our economy, it's costing lives, it's costing quality of life. And so I think the kinds of investments that we are making in our platform are wise investments that are going to pay off for our economy and for our quality of life in the long run.
Okay. Aiden, could you give your response to that, please?
Yes, thank you. Terry, I agree with completely that we need to really make an investment in the future. Ultimately, the impacts that we're going to see are going to just increase exponentially. We've seen damage to infrastructure, which costs even more than what some of our green plans are going to take. Ultimately, the NDP plan also looks at making sure that corporations and the ultra-rich really pay their fair share in terms of offsetting a lot of the things like the green climate plan. Also, it really involves us making sure that we're not putting money towards fossil fuels, which we've mentioned time and time again tonight, and really about redirecting those funds into a different purpose so that we're not necessarily taking on new debt in order to reinvest in our economy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aiden. Okay, Greg, you're up.
Thank you. One of the things I think that the Green Party is part of our platform is full cycle costing. What that is complete transparency as to what manufactured goods and services are costing. So if there's any sort of carbon source or environmental impact because of minerals that have been mined, all of that needs to go into and be transparent in terms of the goods and services that are being produced. And not only that, because we're talking about full cycle, we also need to consider in the cost to consumers what it takes to dispose of the items that we receive. I think we're all pretty frustrated with the amount of packaging that we're being inflicted on. Well, that really should be a part of the transparent cost of goods so that the consumer can make an intelligent choice when making a purchase. Items that are much more resource intensive throughout the entire cycle, will therefore be transparently more costly, and then the consumer can make the correct choice, the more environmentally conscientious choice. And that sort of behavior will decrease the environmental debt that Terry was talking about, and can only be good for the economy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Greg. I think we need to start tying things up here, because I know Terry has to leave, and we're almost at 8:30. Each of you are now going to have 2 minutes to give your concluding remarks, and Terry, maybe you'd like to go first, because I know you're probably in the biggest hurry. So Terry, 2 minutes,
Sure.
please, to conclude.
Well, first of all, thanks, Lynn, for doing a great job at moderating tonight. And of course, it's been great spending time with my colleagues, Aiden and Greg, who are opponents, but I think we share many of the same values and worldviews when it comes to the environment. But you know, I would just say we've been through the worst crisis in over 100 years, certainly in several lifetimes, and I think this election is really about who will finish the fight on COVID and who will build back better. In terms of COVID, the Conservative Party of Canada won't even require their MPs to be vaccinated. So I'm not sure I'm trusting them to finish the fight on COVID. In terms of building back better, I think we've seen what Conservative parties do with healthcare. They cut to the bone, they shut emergency departments, and we've seen that with Victoria Hospital here, and they've made an absolute mess of our healthcare system, so much so that we had to ship 50 people out of our province to ICUs. On the affordability issue, $10 a day childcare, which the Conservatives will cancel, affordable housing, which the Conservatives will not invest in. And when it comes to the environment, we have a granular, detailed, realistic climate plan that actually has been endorsed by the previous Green Party leader of British Columbia and the former leader of the NDP, Thomas Mulcair. Our environmental record can always be improved, and certainly as the local rep, I will be pushing my government to do so, particularly when it comes to issues like Lake Winnipeg. So, folks, I would think very carefully about this election, particularly in Winnipeg South, a very special community, multicultural, multi-faith, the home of the University of Manitoba, a wonderful community that I've had the privilege to represent. And remember what a Conservative government would do. They canceled Kyoto. They will cancel the Paris Accord. They'll take apart our healthcare system. And I would ask for your support for a positive future. And I would like to continue to represent you for another 4 years. So I ask for your vote. Again, I thank my colleagues for a really good discussion tonight, and I want to thank you, Lynn, and the sponsoring organizations for hosting us tonight. I think it's been a really, really positive discussion, and again, I would say that many of the things that we've talked about today, there are shared beliefs and values. So thank you, Greg and Aiden.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry. And Aiden, could you give your closing comments? 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And thank you for having us here today. This has been a great experience, I think, for all three of us to take part in. And I hope that everyone who has observed today has taken something from it and has used that to help make a decision for themselves. Ultimately, Terry mentioned a lot about what the Conservatives have and haven't done recently. And I think the fact that both our Conservative compatriots, the fact that them and the PCP candidates aren't here today is really telling. We know that as a party that they don't really take climate change very seriously. But I think also one thing to really highlight is that we really need to be aggressive if we're going to make any real change. And Terry mentioned earlier on that the Liberal plan includes targets of reducing emissions by 40 to 45%, which was increased from the previous targets of 30%, and that's really not sufficient enough. We need to really be aggressive and have aggressive targets if we're going to really make some sustainable, impactful change. Ultimately, we need to really hit our targets. We have experts say that we have 9 years to really hit those targets before we reach that tipping point, before this climate crisis that we're facing really becomes something that's irreversible. And so ultimately, as a government, we need to make strides and commitments that really align with that to make sure that we hit those targets. Ultimately, of course, a Conservative government is not going to support that, hitting those targets at all. So I want to, of course, acknowledge that. But ultimately, I think that we can do better. And that's what the NDP stands for. And that's why I'm going to be fighting for Winnipeg South.
Thank you, Aiden. And Greg, you get the last word.
Thank you very much. And I will echo the sentiment of the other candidates that have been speaking today. Thank you very much for providing a platform. Thank you, Terry and Aiden, for the opinions that you've put forward today. I would say that you know, Terry has correctly pointed the finger at Conservative governments in general, and specifically here in the province of Manitoba, that have not been a part of the solution and have been a great part of the problem. Unfortunately, the Liberal government has had the opportunity to lead faster in this regard. In Canada, we've had 150 years of back and forth between Conservative and Liberal governments. This has not moved us forward as quickly and as equitably as we should. I think it's time to make a bold change. One of the things that we need in Canada is proportional representation. I was deeply disappointed, and that's one of the reasons why I entered politics, that the Liberal government made the promise to the people of Canada that they would be introducing proportional representation and then reneged on that promise. So now is the time to be bold and vote for true change. And I think it's a strategic vote to vote for the Green Party because it's paid attention to. Clearly, when you look at policies, things that the Green Party, policies that the Green Party has put forward are reflected in the platforms of the other parties, and that will only be strengthened when we have more Green MPs and have them proportionally elected. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Greg. And I want to thank Greg and Aiden for entering the political sphere. Thank you for taking this on. It's not an easy thing to do. I know that. I'm sure Terry will confirm that. It's a weird time to be involved in politics. And I want to thank all of you for having such a respectful and collegial debate tonight. And hopefully we'll see more of this in the election and less of the polarized nonsense that we've been seeing in other venues. So thank you very much, all of you. And good luck to all of you in the election. And we'll see what happens on September 20th.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night.